Thanks, Joe. I'm Mike Dane. As Joe said, I joined the committee in the spring. And I came to Stratham 4 years ago. I have 2 sons and a stepdaughter in the school. So already, we're fairly involved in the town. And my first town hall experience was 2016 town meeting, where I observed what happened with the water and sewer bond authority proposal. It was very contentious and it was soundly defeated. And it really struck me how that all took place. And I thought to myself, that's a very important issue for the town, and it's one that people seem to feel like they don't know nearly enough about. And I felt that it was very important that somehow a responsible job is done of presenting the information related to that issue so that we can make clear decisions for the town. So I was able to get involved with the committee. I think that, as Joe said, that committee was formed really out of that experience in 2016 in order to understand what happened and to find a way to do a better job with that issue. And we've refocused on a renewed transparency and communication with the town. And this is really a large part of what's happening now with the survey. So I want to talk about the strategy that we're pursuing. And Joe alluded to a survey, to a study that's also being conducted at the same time. This really represents a 2-pronged strategy that the committee is taking in order to be able to plan properly the infrastructure and the commercial development in the gateway, or to determine what kind of plan should be set and whether such development should take place. One arm of this strategy is the survey, and that's to find out what you folks think about what we should do. Because if it's clearly presented and the town doesn't want it, we're not doing it. But on the other hand, if this is what the town wants, it's our duty to push it forward. So really learning not just from what, the few people that are able to get in a room on a particular session, but really reaching out and getting as many people engaged as possible in understanding the feeling of the town was really the objective of this survey. And the other arm of this strategy is to, and this is, as Joe mentioned, to really address a lot of the questions that were raised in that session back in April, to find out what happens to really build an economic model that tells us in a more quantitative way what happens if we do infrastructure development, what happens to the tax base, what happens to the town finances over the long term, and what if we don't, what happens? And are there different ways to do it that other towns have taken, and how do they play out over, let's say, 10 to 15, 20 years? Because I think that's the information that the town is asking for in order to make intelligent decisions about this. So that's where we're going. Okay? And this survey is one important piece of this. So the survey was delivered by using SurveyMonkey, which is an online service. It was disseminated by mailing lists that the town has control over, with a lot of help from community groups, forwarding, as we definitely encourage to be done. We put it out on social media as well, and with the help of the community, we got a really very encouraging response. So, as of the time of closing the survey, on September 12th, I believe, we had 611 responses, which in a town with a population of 20 and above, adult population, as of the last demographics that I have access to from 2015, about 5,400 residents. That's over 11%. And there's no ignoring that sample. I mean, that's 1 out of 10 people in town. That's a very statistically significant representation of the town's opinions. I have filtered everything that you'll see in these slides to show only those people who answered the question, are you a resident of Stratham? Yes, which is 98% of the people responding to the survey, so we did successfully target that, and who completed all the questions. So we had 587 such responses, and that's still almost 11%. We did have 14 responses who were declared themselves not Stratham residents, and those were excluded from the statistics. So what were the objectives of the survey? What you'll see at the core of this survey is that we want to learn very directly how does the town feel about water and sewer infrastructure and how that investment should or should not take place. And we ask that question in several different ways to try to understand people's attitudes towards it and concerns about it. We wanted to understand a little bit about the sufficiency of town businesses to meet the town's needs. We wanted to understand how people feel about the tax rate, whether it's affordable, and other features that they may find desirable for the town. And then to learn a little bit about the people who responded to the survey, some basic demographics. Now, please understand, there's a lot more things we would have liked to ask, but I think one of the reasons that we did well in the response is because the survey was limited to 19 questions. It took about 5 to 6 minutes to complete, and that's close to the limit, I think. We learned a little bit about shopping and commuting habits, about how people own homes or rent, participation in town government, how long people have been in town, what attracted you to the town, this kind of thing. So I hope that as we go through, you'll learn a little something. I certainly did. I've brought up to the front, in the interest of kind of leading with the punchline to some degree, some key findings. And then we'll go into all of the details of the data. So first of all, as I mentioned, we successfully targeted the survey to 98% of responses of residents. Interestingly, a strong majority of respondents, 74%, responded positively to the affirmative statement, so long as developers pay their share, some investment from the town makes sense for infrastructure. Even when we talk about taxpayers will benefit in the long term from town infrastructure investment, still we see a 65% majority. You might imagine, and I think it's an important aspect to understand, how the attitudes change between families that have children in the schools versus families that do not. And so we looked at that. 60% of the respondents report no school-age children in the household. So I think that we can say that that point of view is at least fairly represented in the survey results. That the survey, I don't think we can say would be overwhelmed by families that are, have a lot of kids in the schools and have a lot of demand for services. More than 68% of the respondents have lived in Stratham for 10 years or more. So again, we're not talking about only late arrivals here. I think that we have a very encouraging breadth of representation in the survey sample. So what attracted people to Stratham? I thought it was kind of interesting. The typical stuff, really. Location, close to work and family. These were the top 3 scoring by far. And I'll show you the slide with all the data. Rural character, very important to people, and quality of schools. Surprisingly to me, tax rate and the availability and cost of housing wasn't very important to people. Only 16 and 11% respectively. So let's look at this issue of what happens, how does the presence of school-age children in the household affect opinions. When we look at those key questions on infrastructure investment, here I've broken it down so you can see. I'm just going to bring up the pointer here. You can see that for infrastructure, investment in water and sewer infrastructure will pay off over the next 10 to 15 years. That enjoyed 70% support for those families with school-aged children, compared to 51% for those without school-aged children in the household. So it's a marked difference. There's still a majority support, but it's a narrow majority. Taxpayers will benefit in the long term from town infrastructure investment. Again, those families with children in the household, 76% support, and 56% for those families without children in the household of school age. And that kind of condition statement that received the strongest support from the respondents, so long as developers pay their share, some investment from the town makes sense. 80% of those families with school-aged children support that statement. Still quite strong support from those families without school-aged children at 69%, but appreciably less. And then finally, the negative statement, no town funds should go towards water and sewer infrastructure. That was supported by a minority by both groups, 33% for families with school-aged children and 43% for those reporting no school-aged children. So I hope this helps to show, when we look at the sample overall, we see broad-based support in the town for the positive statements about investment in infrastructure, but there is a marked difference in the attitudes of those two groups. What about active voters? How does that break down? Well, we find that for those who are town meeting voters, we see slightly lower support for these statements than the sample as a whole. So what you see on the left in the yellow bars are the percentage support for the survey group as a whole, versus on the right in the blue bars, those who had answered affirmatively to vote in town meeting. I vote in town meeting. So I think it's a kind of a cautionary lesson that, for those who have a positive or a negative attitude, however their disposition is, it's very important that you show up and you're heard at town meeting. So let's look at the attitudes toward the Gateway District. One of the questions that we asked was, what would you like to see more of that would improve your quality of life in the town? And this is the result, and I think it's quite interesting. It's really, this chart you see is dominated by two things. One is open space is still here. Now, and the other is this cluster of bars around, that you would expect around people who want to see a real center of town. These represent walkable downtown, variety of retail and businesses, and restaurants, bars, and craft beer. Yes, I wrote the questions. I think that this shows that there is a very strong support and desire for this concept of a walkable downtown and the pieces that go with it. These are the items that really stand out. I think that it's very interesting that, given that this town has made such a very strong commitment to open space, and that we have more open space and space in conservation than almost any town, comparable town in New Hampshire. Nevertheless, people continue to rate that as important, and I think that shows that people place a very high importance on that. And one of the things I think that is important to understand is the synergy between these two groups of ideas, because really, by doing the development in a planned way, or by doing commercial development in a planned way that allows for concentration in the Gateway District, it does two things. One is it improves your tax revenue from commercial properties that supports the open space, which does not produce tax revenue. nearly as high a rate as really any other kind of use. But it also protects that open space by ensuring that the commercial development takes place where you want it to take place and doesn't spread out all over the town in an uncontrolled way. So these are the priorities that the town revealed to us. And I want to take note here too, there was an other please specify. We got a lot of interesting comments in the write-ins for these, and I want to assure everyone who took the time to write in a comment, I read them all. We pay attention to every single one. I don't bring them out here because I feel that it's important that the overall population be allowed to speak for itself, and that a very strongly worded statement from one individual doesn't tend to overwhelm the voice of the majority. But please be assured that for those of you who took the time to write such a comment, that those are paid careful attention to in our analysis. So let's look at the key questions. How did we ask in different ways, and what does this say about how people feel about investment, actual investment from the town in water and sewer to facilitate commercial development in the Gateway District? So this is a wording that received the strongest support. So long as developers pay their share, some investment from the town makes sense. And I think this wording was selected in a way to help people understand that it can be done in a balanced way. And the very strong response to this, I think, shows that people, if they're assured that it's done in a balanced way and that the commercial developers are making an investment too, that it's something that they support. So I think, and I think that you can see that at the bottom here is the strongly agree with the agree stacked on top, and here in this column you have the strongly disagree and the disagree stacked on top. So you can see clearly the level of support at almost 74% for general agreement with this statement. What about long-term benefit from infrastructure investment? So when we leave what is the term undefined, and we just say taxpayers will benefit in the long term from town infrastructure investment, we also get very strong positive response, 64.5%, clear majority. Now, what happens when we put some definition around what does long-term mean? And we say investment in water and sewer infrastructure will pay off over the next 10 to 15 years. There's still a majority support at 59%, but it's a little weaker because I think that people, and rightly so, are a little more nervous about committing to a specific term where this is going to pay off. People are not economic forecasters. There's some uncertainty here. And this points to the importance of this economic model that's the other arm of this strategy that we're working on getting completed, to really to put some more definition on how long is the payoff and how does it look for different scenarios. And last, I thought it was very important, the committee thought, I think, to have the opportunity to make a negative statement, so we make sure that we're really reading how the town feels about this. And so we included the statement, no town funds should go toward water and sewer infrastructure. And you can see the response is there. 38, almost 39% respond affirmatively to this no town funds should go toward water and sewer. It is a minority. 61% disagree with the statement, but it is a significant minority. What I think is interesting here to point out, too, is that people had the opportunity to support multiple statements. And you might think, and I did, that those who agreed with this negative statement would not support any of the positive statements. But that's not true. In fact, if we go back to the most balanced statement, we found that well over 20% of those who supported the negative statement also support this most conditioned positive statement. And what that tells me, or suggests to me, is that this negative statement is an expression of concern, but that concern is possible to address for at least some of the people. So, who are the respondents to this survey? Let's learn a little bit about them, about us, because this is our town. What attracted you here? What are the most important features that attracted us to Stratham? So as I mentioned in the opening key findings, rural character is important at 56, almost 57%. Location, well, it is the old watchword in real estate, the most important thing, 58%. And quality of schools, these are the ones that really stand out. I don't think there are many surprises here. How long have you lived here? As I mentioned, these two bars here, 20 years or more and 10 to 19 years, account for 68% of the total sample. And you can see these latecomers like me here account for a smaller group, but still a significant group. And then those select few who are born and raised in Stratham. So this is, I think, shows a good broad representation of different groups in the survey sample, which I think is very encouraging. We all plan to stay here. Nobody's going anywhere. Okay. Expecting to stay in Stratham for the foreseeable future, 78%. Those who are the largest group, which is at about almost 11%, who are planning to move out of Stratham, say that it might happen within the next 10 years. So that's pretty far off. That's kind of like when the kids are out of school and everything, dust settles, maybe we'll go. But generally, there's a strong commitment to staying in Stratham. And we all own homes and pay taxes. So overwhelmingly, this is a population responding to the survey and expressing these opinions of tax-paying homeowners. Okay. These other categories disappear into the bottom of the chart at less than 1%. How do we feel about the taxes that we're paying as tax-paying homeowners? Well, probably about the way you'd expect. Nobody likes paying taxes. But 33% say that they're acceptable and about what they'd expect to pay for the services received. Frankly, I'm surprised such a big proportion of people are that equanimous about paying their taxes and feel like they get good value for what's received, but I think it's very encouraging that they do. 48%, the biggest, higher than I'd like, but affordable, which I think is kind of, right down the middle for the American way. And then there is this small but significant group that say it's simply too high and it's a financial hardship. And that's, I think, an important observation. I already alluded to the fact that 60% of the households responding to the survey indicate that they don't have school-age children in the family. Here's the breakdown. So you can see in the blue, no children at 59%, and then you can see 1, 2, 3, and 4 or more with 2 children in the household, and school being by far the most common. So how does this population that we've heard from in our survey interact with the town government? Because in the end, that's the most important expression of opinion. Level of knowledge about the Route 108 commercial zoning project, I think that this shows we have a big opportunity for education, and that's why we worked hard to put this session together and the other one on the 25th, and to get people into the seats. But Failing that, at least we're trying hard to find other ways to disseminate the information to you. So for those of you who are viewing this as a video online, we hope that this will encourage you to participate more directly. 30% feel that they have, almost 31%, a good general understanding of the issues, and there's a minority, 8%, that has strongly held opinions on the subject. But I think that this over 61% that either isn't familiar with the initiative or has heard of it only in very general terms represents a big opportunity for us, and it's something that we have to focus all our energy on going into this year's town meeting. And where it really matters, where you make your vote count, do you vote in town meeting? 56% are voting in town meeting. 81% vote ballot issues, so much stronger performance there. 32% attend committee or informational meetings like this one. And over half of you like to have your voice heard through surveys, email, or social media, similar to this survey. An important 26, almost 27% indicate that they're willing to participate actively, but only if it doesn't require physical attendance. So I think we see that as a strong effect of the busy lives everyone leads today. We asked some questions to try to learn how people interact with local businesses, because this is all about developing downtown and commercial businesses that provide more services to the town, and to do it in a way that people can interact with in a more natural way. So let's learn a little bit about how people are interacting with the businesses in the town now. Where are you most likely to shop? I learned something from looking at this. A lot of people shop frequently in Stratham. You'll notice that the largest frequent bar behind Stratham is online at 60%. And then for occasionally we see, what we would expect, Exeter, Portsmouth, and Epping have fairly strong performances. Where are you most likely to go out to eat? Well, it's of interest. I think it's one of the key kinds of business that we see coming in to the Gateway District. And we see that, surprisingly, Portsmouth is the highest ranking for frequent, and for occasionally, Stratham, Exeter, and Portsmouth are roughly even at somewhere between 50 and 60%. When we talk about not only shopping, but other businesses and how you interact with them, how frequently you interact with businesses within Stratham, we find respondents at 40% almost every day interacting with some business in Stratham, which I think is really important, because it shows that that local interaction for our population is really important. And I think that shows that if we build that opportunity, there's a lot of demand there. When we add once or twice a week, it's over 50%. And a very, very small proportion indicate that they infrequently or never interact with local businesses in Stratham. So that's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for your patience in listening to me talk for so very long without a break. And I want to open the floor to questions now. I hope that your patience has been rewarded by some new insights. Thanks, Joe. I'm Mike Dane. As Joe said, I joined the committee